Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about API security, specifically in the world of Kubernetes.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're not super familiar with Kubernetes,
Yeah.
you can kind of think about it like it's the conductor of an orchestra.
Okay.
But instead of musicians, it's managing all these little containerized apps
Gotcha.
that make up a bigger application.
Right.
Our source material today is a presentation that was given at APIDays Hong Kong 2023.
Okay.
And it was by Tracy Walker, who's a senior security engineer at SUSE.
Nice.
And they were showcasing a tool called NuVector. And the thing that really caught our eye about this is they're promising this zero effort, zero trust security.
Zero effort, zero trust.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to unpack today.
Okay.
What does that even mean? Does it live up to the hype? And how does NuVector actually make this happen?
Yeah, how do they pull that off?
Right.
Zero effort.
And also, we're going to be looking at why just knowing about vulnerabilities might not be enough anymore.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think the concept of zero trust itself is just fascinating, right? Because it's really a complete shift in how we think about security.
Right.
It's not just adding another layer of protection or something. It's really, it's a mindset change, right?
Yeah.
So instead of assuming that everything inside our network is safe and trustworthy, zero trust is kind of like, nope, we don't trust anything by default.
So, like, assume everyone is a suspect.
Exactly.
Until proven otherwise.
Like every user, every device, every application needs to constantly be proving its trustworthiness.
I see.
And Tracy Walker used this really good analogy in the presentation talking about airport security.
Yeah.
So you need a valid ticket to get through security,
right? But
you also need a photo ID.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just have one or the other.
You need both.
They both have to be verified. And that's kind of like a core principle of zero trust. It's not just about who you are, but it's about what you are allowed to do.
Okay.
So it's both.
That makes sense. But zero trust often gets painted as this very complex, all or nothing kind of approach.
Yeah.
Is that really true, though?
No, not at all. That's one of the big misconceptions, I think, with zero trust.
Okay.
It's not like an on-off switch.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it's more of a framework. It's a set of principles that you can apply in different degrees depending on what your needs are.
Oh, okay.
And your risk tolerance. You know, it can be tailored.
So you can kind of pick and choose which parts make the most sense.
Yeah, you can adopt it.
For your environment.
Incrementally. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's where understanding the limitations of the traditional security approaches becomes really, really important, because for so long we've been relying on things like antivirus, firewalls, and these are based on these threat signatures, essentially like a list of known bad actors.
So it's kind of like having a wanted poster for every virus or malware out there.
Exactly.
If you don't recognize the face, you can't catch the bad guy.
Yeah, but the problem is that, you know, cyber criminals, they're always coming up with new ways to attack, right?
Yeah.
What happens if there's a brand new threat, like a zero-day exploit? There's no signature for that.
Right. So then your wanted poster is completely useless.
Exactly.
And it can just slip right by.
It's blind to it.
That's a little unsettling to think about.
It is, yeah.
You're always kind of one step behind.
Yeah. And even things like source code analysis.
Right.
Which, you know, can be really useful for identifying potential vulnerabilities in your code.
Yeah.
Even that has its limitations.
So even if you know how the attacker might get in, you still don't know what they'll do once they're in.
Exactly.
Right.
Because it doesn't give you that full picture of how an application behaves in a real world environment.
Okay.
Which is key.
So how does this zero trust mindset address those limitations?
Well, instead of focusing on what we know is bad, zero trust kind of flips the script.
Okay.
So it defines what normal behavior looks like for your applications.
Yeah.
And then flags anything that deviates from that norm.
I see.
Even if it's something that's completely new and we've never seen before.
So it's not just blocking known threats, it's constantly monitoring.
Right.
To detect any anomalies that might be malicious.
Exactly. It's like having a security system for your house that learns the routines of your household.
Okay, yeah.
And then alerts you when something is out of the ordinary.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. So when I hear this zero effort, zero trust, my skeptical side comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can something this sophisticated be effortless. Right.
Exactly.
Well, that's where tools like NuVector come in.
Okay.
And the key is automation.
Okay.
So NuVector learns your application's normal network traffic and processes, and it automatically creates a baseline of what's considered normal behavior.
So it's constantly learning and updating its understanding of that's normal.
Constantly learning and adapting.
So if it detects anything that's outside that established pattern, like an unexpected network connection, a process that's running when it shouldn't be, it flags that as potentially
malicious.
Okay.
And then it can either alert you to that, or it can just block it automatically, depending on how you have it configured.
So it's like a continuous security audit, always watching.
Exactly.
For deviations from the norm.
Yep. And one thing to keep in mind is NuVector doesn't completely abandon traditional security methods.
Right.
You know, it still incorporates things like threat signature matching, but it adds this layer of zero trust on top of it.
So it's kind of like having a security guard who is checking IDs at the door, but then is also keeping an eye on everyone's behavior inside.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Okay, so it's not like
not either
an either situation.
Yeah, it's both.
You're getting the best of both worlds.
Right.
Now, when we think about how important APIs are to modern applications,
absolutely,
this layered approach seems even more important.
Because APIs are so often the entry point for attacks.
Right.
You know, so having that extra level of protection is just...
Yeah, it's like the doors and windows to your application. Right?
Exactly.
So you got to make sure that they're guarded really well.
Yeah.
Now, let's get a little bit more specific.
Okay.
How does NuVector protect those API entry points? What does that look like?
Well, think of it like NuVector sets up very specific rules for how your APIs are allowed to be used. So it's kind of like having a very strict bouncer at the door of your API.
I like that analogy.
Right. Making sure only the right people are getting in.
Right. Okay.
And that they're behaving themselves once they're inside.
So essentially it's enforcing access control, but at a very granular level.
Exactly. Controlling who can access what. And it's doing this in a way that's really tailored to the application. So NuVector looks at things like the network traffic that's associated with your APIs.
Oh, okay.
So like which applications are talking to each other, on what ports, using what protocols.
Right.
It also analyzes the processes that are involved in those interactions.
So it's not just checking to see if someone has the right credentials.
Right.
It's also making sure they're using those credentials to do the things that they're actually authorized to do.
Looking for any signs of, you know, malicious intent or suspicious activity, even if that initial access was granted.
Okay, so it's like a second layer of verification.
Yeah.
That's really impressive. It sounds like it gives a really comprehensive level of protection for your APIs.
It does.
Now, I remember reading in the presentation that NuVector goes beyond just security.
Yes.
It can also be a valuable tool for developers, too.
Absolutely.
So how does that play out?
Well, because NuVector is so good at spotting those deviations from normal behavior, it can actually help developers catch coding errors or vulnerabilities.
Oh, wow.
Before they even become a security breach.
So it's like having an extra set of eyes on your code.
Yeah, it's like having a super-powered debugger that's constantly analyzing your code.
That's amazing.
And it can say, hey, that looks a little bit off. You might want to take a closer look at that.
Okay.
It can point you in the right direction.
That's really fascinating. It's not just a security tool. You can improve the quality and reliability of your applications as well.
Right.
So I know we've covered a lot of stuff, but I think it's time to take a step back.
Okay.
And consider the bigger picture for a minute.
All right.
We've talked about zero trust. In this context of cybersecurity, but this concept of trust but verify seems like it could have broader implications. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you hit on something really interesting because it does make you wonder. If we can apply this to our digital systems, could we extend it to other aspects of our lives?
Right. Could we benefit from a zero trust approach in other areas where we oftentimes operate on these assumptions of trust?
Right.
It's definitely something worth exploring further.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things that I love about these deep dives.
Me too.
Is that they spark these kinds of broader questions. And they make us think really critically about how seemingly technical concepts can have these wider implications.
Absolutely.
So speaking of connections.
Okay.
I think it's a good time to shift gears and start talking about, all right, how NuVector specifically tackles the challenge of API security in Kubernetes environments.
Let's get into the details.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that sounds like a great place to pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll see you then.
See you there. All right, so I'm sure you're probably wondering how all of this zero trust goodness actually plays out in the world of Kubernetes.
Yeah, because Kubernetes itself can feel like a bit of a black box sometimes.
Yeah.
With all the containers and pods and services, all those moving parts. Where does NuVector even fit into all of that?
Well, the cool thing is NuVector is designed to integrate seamlessly with that whole Kubernetes environment.
Okay.
So it understands how applications are structured and deployed within Kubernetes.
Okay.
And it uses that knowledge to enforce these security policies at a very granular level.
So it's not just like a generic security tool that's slapped on top?
No, it's purpose-built for Kubernetes.
Okay, gotcha.
So remember when we were talking about NuVector analyzing all the network traffic and the processes? Well, in the world of Kubernetes, that stuff can get pretty complex.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
You've got containers talking to each other, pods talking to services, all this stuff happening dynamically as your application scales up and down.
Right, because Kubernetes is all about orchestrating all those interactions. So how does NuVector keep track of it all?
Well, it uses something called deep network inspection.
Okay.
And it doesn't just look at the surface level, like the IP addresses and port numbers. It actually analyzes the content of those communications to really understand what's happening.
So it's like it's eavesdropping on the conversations between all the different parts of the application.
You could put it that way. And it's looking for those patterns that could indicate some malicious activity.
Okay.
So, for example, if you have a container that suddenly tries to access a database it's never spoken to before, that's going to raise a red flag.
Right, yeah, because that's deviating from that baseline.
Exactly.
Right. But let's bring it back to APIs.
Okay.
You know, because that's what
our listeners are interested in.
Really interested in.
Yeah.
How does NuVector specifically protect APIs in this whole Kubernetes context?
So when you're thinking about API security in Kubernetes, it's all about how those API endpoints are exposed and accessed.
Okay.
Right? You want to make sure that only the authorized apps can talk to those APIs.
Right.
And that they're doing it in a safe and expected manner.
So it's not just preventing unauthorized access.
Right.
It's also about making sure that the authorized users are using it correctly.
That they're using the API correctly. Exactly.
Okay.
And NuVector can do this in several ways. So first, it can do network segmentation, which basically means you're creating these little virtual boundaries within your Kubernetes cluster to isolate different parts of your application.
So even if an attacker got into one part,
it wouldn't be able to easily move to other parts of the application.
It limits the blast radius.
Oh, okay.
Right. So even if one part is compromised, the whole thing doesn't fall apart.
Okay.
And that segmentation applies specifically to APIs too.
Okay.
You can isolate your API endpoints from the rest of the application.
So they're kind of like in their own little protected bubble.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's one way it protects them. What else does it do?
Well, remember those network and process rules.
Yes.
It can apply those rules specifically to APIs too.
Okay.
So it can ensure that like only authorized apps are allowed to talk to your API on the right ports, using the right protocols, all that good stuff.
So like very strict rules about who can knock on your API's door.
Exactly.
And how they're allowed to knock.
You got it. And it goes beyond just basic access control.
Okay.
It can actually analyze the content of API requests and responses.
So it's not just checking that they have the right key.
It's also looking at what they're carrying in and out of the house.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And this kind of deep inspection is really valuable for protecting against attacks that try to exploit vulnerabilities in your code.
Okay, so it's multiple layers of protection.
Multiple layers.
For your APIs.
Yep.
From controlling access to analyzing behavior to inspecting the content.
You got it. And all of this is happening automatically and continuously in the background.
So NuVector is learning.
Constantly learning and adapting.
To your application's behavior.
Makes it much harder for attackers to sneak in.
So that's where the zero effort part starts to make a little more sense.
Right, exactly.
You're not constantly...
You don't have to manually configure everything.
Right, exactly.
It's doing a lot of the work for you.
Okay. Now I remember Tracy Walker talking in the presentation about how NuVector is not just this security tool.
Yeah.
But it's also a really valuable tool for developers.
Absolutely.
So how does that work with API security?
Well, it goes back to that ability to spot deviations from normal. So NuVector can help developers catch coding errors or vulnerabilities in their API implementation.
Oh, wow.
Before they even become a security breach.
So it's like that extra set of eyes.
Exactly.
That we were talking about before.
And it's especially good at catching those really tricky logic errors.
Right.
Or those weird edge cases that you might not see during development.
So it's like a superpowered debugger.
Yeah, it's like a super debugger.
That's analyzing.
That's always running, always analyzing.
And it can just say, hey, that looks a little weird. You might want to look at that.
Exactly.
That's amazing. And that early detection can really...
Oh, it can save you a lot of trouble later on.
Save you some headaches.
Big time.
Right.
Because it's way easier to fix a vulnerability before it gets exploited.
For sure.
Yeah.
So you're shifting security left.
You got it.
Integrating it into the development process.
It's not an afterthought.
Right.
It's baked in.
And that's a big part of the whole zero trust philosophy.
It is, yeah.
It's not just about building walls around your application.
Right.
It's about making sure.
It's about making sure the application is secure itself.
Right. So it's a more holistic approach.
It is, yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to get the bigger picture here. Zero trust isn't just this technology, it's a
mindset.
It's a mindset shift.
Yeah.
A way of thinking about security.
It touches everything.
Yeah.
The whole software development life cycle.
And that's why it's so powerful.
Right. It's not a silver bullet or anything.
Right.
But it's a really good framework
Yeah.
that can guide you towards building more secure and resilient applications.
Okay.
And with tools like NuVector, it makes it all much more practical and achievable.
It's like having the roadmap of the tools to get you there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of the future.
Okay.
Let's shift gears again.
All right.
And talk about the broader implications
of
this zero trust mindset. We've talked about it with cybersecurity, but
yeah.
Could this concept extend beyond the realm of technology?
That's a big question.
Right.
Could we benefit from a zero trust approach in other areas of our lives?
Right.
Where we often just kind of assume trust.
Right, exactly. It's a really
interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. That's where we'll pick things up in part 3.
See there.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about this zero trust stuff with NuVector and API security. But yeah, like we were saying at the end of part 2,
right?
We got to zoom out a little bit and think bigger picture.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to get kind of lost in those technical weeds.
Right.
But what's really cool about this whole idea of zero trust is just how broadly it can apply, beyond just cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Exactly. If never trust, always verify works for our digital stuff.
Right.
Where else could this be valuable? It seems like a completely different way of thinking about trust.
It really challenges that traditional model of just like implicit trust, where we just kind of assume that things are going to work the way they're supposed to.
Right, exactly. We trust that traffic lights are going to work.
Yeah.
That our bank's going to keep our money safe.
Right.
That the food that we buy at the store is safe to eat.
Yeah.
We put a lot of trust into these systems without really thinking about it.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, most of the time, that trust is totally fine.
Yeah.
Like, these things do generally work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah.
But as our world gets more and more complex and everything's connected,
right,
that kind of blind trust can really be a vulnerability.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify, right?
Yeah.
Could a zero trust approach actually help us?
It's interesting to think about risks and make better decisions in other areas.
It's a cool thought experiment. Imagine applying zero trust to something like data privacy.
Ooh, yeah, okay. Instead of blindly clicking accept on all those cookie policies or letting apps.
Right, giving them access to your contacts and location and all that stuff.
What if we actually thought about it from a
zero trust perspective?
Yeah.
Zero trust perspective.
We'd be a lot more careful about what information we share and who we share it with.
Right.
We'd constantly be evaluating how trustworthy these companies are, and we'd be a lot quicker to cut them off.
Revoke access, right, when it's not needed anymore.
Yeah, if they don't need it, it would definitely change the whole power dynamic.
Right. Instead of them just having our data by default, they'd have to own our trust.
Exactly.
And we'd be a lot more aware of, what are we giving away?
Yeah, and what are the risks?
And what are the risks? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And that awareness is key. Zero trust isn't about getting rid of trust altogether.
Right.
It's about making it more deliberate.
So it's like understanding that trust is not just this thing that's given.
Yeah.
It has to be earned.
Right. And it can change over time.
Right. And that applies to everything.
Everything.
From apps to relationships.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, taking zero trust, it's like every part of your life probably wouldn't work very well.
It might be a little much.
It would be a little extreme.
Yeah.
But those core principles of questioning your assumptions, of verifying information, and not just blindly trusting, those are so valuable.
Yeah, for sure. It's about finding the right balance. We don't want to live in a world where we're constantly suspicious.
Right, exactly.
But we don't want to be naive either.
Right.
It's about being informed.
Yeah. So zero trust, when it's done right, can be really, really powerful.
It can help you navigate all the complexities of the world.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, our challenge to you is think about where else this could apply in your life.
Yeah.
You know, beyond just technology.
Where do you see blind trust?
Yeah.
Where could you benefit from being a little more trust but verify?
Exactly. Let us know your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Zero Trust everywhere.
We'd love to hear from you.
And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure.
See you next time.